Welcome to Vermont Voices. I'm Sharice Madigan, and today we're joined by one of Bennington's own representatives in the state Senate, Richard Sears. Senator Sears, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you again. Could you start by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I grew up in the Framingham, Massachusetts area and went to the University of Vermont. And when I graduated from UVM, I was out looking for a job and found one with the Vermont Department of Corrections, and worked for the Vermont Department of Corrections for, I think, 3 years. And then I moved to Bennington to start the 204 Depot program for troubled youth. And retired from that in 2006. And I've been interested in politics most of my life. And I ran for the Bennington Select Board, and then I ran for the state Senate and got elected in '93. And I've kept running ever since and been reelected, luckily. And so it's been a pleasure to serve in the Senate and represent Bennington County, one of the forgotten areas of the state.
Absolutely. And what keeps you coming back to politics year after year?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Number one is it has its rewards. It's some days it's a pain in the neck, but by and large, you actually see things improve, you see things happen, and you make progress. And that's pretty much what keeps me coming back. And also the fact that once you've been there for a while, you begin to establish an ability to do things for your constituents and do things for the area that you represent. It's a job that changes every day. You never know what's coming next.
Keeps you on your toes.
It sure does.
And you speak of progress. What progress do you see in Bennington County over the years?
Well, I mean, we've had our ups and downs in Bennington County, but I think that by and large, we're moving forward. A lot of times people talk about how horrible things are down in Bennington or in Manchester or in Arlington. But I look at this area of the state and the growth that we've seen, and that we have some good jobs coming. And we've had our trials and tribulations, to be sure. But what's being discussed now, downtown Bennington, I know in Manchester there's been some great advances. So I think overall, if you look at what we've done and where we're at, I think things are better. We've got our challenges, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Among those, the opiate problem and other, economic development. We have formed a relationship with Windham County so that economic development-wise, we're looking at the southern part of the state. We finally have some real attention paid to us in terms of economic development, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future.
It's always nice to see. And regarding the opiate crisis, you listed that as one of the big challenges we face.
Yeah.
How is the state grappling with that issue?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand it's a nationwide problem.
Yes.
It's not just Vermont. When I meet with, I've been fortunate to be the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee for a number of years, and most criminal laws and corrections issues go through judiciary. And when I talk to colleagues in other states, they're grappling with the same problem. It is, I would say, because it's been a very difficult problem to wrap your arms around. It takes a tremendous amount of energy from your communities. You look at the treatment, the law enforcement, and from the absolute problems that it's created for families. There are a number of kids who are born to opiate-addicted moms. There are a number of kids who aren't able to be taken care of by their parents because of the opiate addiction. So it's having a tremendous impact on the culture in this area, but also as I said, around the country. I mean, we're not alone. I think Manchester, New Hampshire, is one of the epicenters. So it's just a very frightening prospect. A lot of the crime that we see, break-ins to houses, and other things are all related to that opiate epidemic. Keeping a heroin addiction alive is very difficult, and we've seen the number of overdose deaths increase dramatically, particularly with the fentanyl used. So what we've done here in Bennington County and around the state is admitted that we can't arrest our way out of this. I certainly think we need to deal with drug dealers and those that are coming here, but we have to also recognize it's a supply and demand problem. If the demand wasn't there, the supply wouldn't be here. And so it's a matter of both prevention and treatment. And we, at least in the Bennington area, now have over 200 people in the Suboxone program. Program's been developed with the United Counseling Service and the hospital in Bennington that is working for around 30 people. We need more. We need a lot more treatment options. One of the discussions with our state's attorney, frequently she says, I just don't have the treatment options for these folks. Mm-hmm. So it's a frustration, but we're making progress. And again, comparing us with other states, I think we're far ahead of the game. The naloxone that we are providing is saving lives. Even though the overdose deaths are increasing, it would be much worse.
It's a scary prospect.
Yeah.
And aside from the opiate crisis, which is such a staggering and complex issue, cannabis legalization has been a huge issue in the legislature this year as well. What are your thoughts on that debate?
Well, a few years ago, the RAND Corporation did a study, and quite frankly, I think most of us were surprised at the numbers. And when you looked at 80,000 Vermonters using marijuana on a regular basis, it's kind of staggering in a state of 650,000 people. And do we really want 80,000 lawbreakers out there? And then there's where do you get the drugs? And obviously it's the black market here. Or what some call the gray market, where people produce enough for themselves and grow a little extra for their friends and that type of thing. But by and large, it's a black market product. So working with others in the Senate, I became convinced that the right thing for Vermont, while controversial, was to legalize and have a seed-to-sale regulated system that we would tax, but more importantly, it would be regulated. People knew what they were getting, and that you use some of the money from that for treatment, for other addictions. A lot of it could go to prevention, and some of it should go to public safety for the concern of people driving drugged. It's not that, I don't see that as increased because we have a legal system. It's there, it's here now. We have a number of problems with drugged driving that I don't believe will increase with legalization. Last year, Governor Shumlin supported a legalization effort, and it died in the House. We passed a bill, and the House basically refused to advance it. This year, Governor Scott has shown mixed emotions about it, but finally at the end of the session, the House passed a legalization bill that I wasn't particularly fond of because it didn't have any way to get to a regulated system. It didn't. So I working with the House Chair of House Judiciary, Representative Grad, I put together a package that had a commission that would look at a regulated system, but also would legalize on July 1st, 2018. The House bill had a legalization July 1, 2017. So instead, she and I talked about it. They got it through the House by a very close margin, and the governor vetoed it. But Governor Scott said if certain issues were addressed that he was concerned with, that he would support the bill. So I began working with his team and some other senators, and yesterday I had a meeting with Representative Grad, and we came to an agreement on a new bill that would meet, we think, what the governor was concerned about. We sent him copies of that bill, and we're waiting to hear back from him if it's something that he could support. And it's possible in the veto session that's coming June 21st that we'll be able to pass a bill. So time will tell.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned earlier that really with the opiate crisis, there's no way to arrest our way out of this. And
Right.
with marijuana, we don't want to have, that many lawbreakers in the state.
Right.
And Vermont is one of few states in a nation to contract private prisons to house
Yeah.
our inmates. Why is
Right.
this?
Well, back in about 20 years ago, we faced, like most states, an era where we were locking people up. And we had more people locked up than we had beds. And so back in and I'm going to say the early 90s, the Clinton era, it was a get tough on crime. And many states followed. And so we had about 2,000 beds in the Vermont system, and we had about 2,700 people that needed to be incarcerated. So we started to contract with other states, first with, and this is even before I was in the legislature, first with, I believe, New Jersey, and we contracted with Virginia. And the results were not that great, but we still had 750, some that number who were housed out of state. In 2000, sometime in the 90s, we began contracting with private for-profit prisons. Corrections Corporation of America was the contractor, and they had a prison in Kentucky that we sent people to. That brings us to about 2010, I believe. We saw Vermont as one of the fastest growing prison populations in the nation. Along with Idaho, we were number 1 or 2, and they were number 1 or 2. So Vermont began what I would call criminal justice reform, and I'm proud to have helped lead that effort. First with Governor Douglas, and then it continued under Governor Shumlin. And we've reduced the number of people going out of state from about 750 to 800 at one point down to we're at 250 to 270. The contract with Corrections Corporation of America ended a year and a half ago. We signed a contract with a private firm that had housed our population in Michigan. They denied the contract. Chose not to renew it because our numbers were so low. They had been hoping for 500 and they were only getting 270. Mm-hmm. So we were able to work an arrangement with Pennsylvania. And obviously that was an administrative, it wasn't my choice, but I do know the corrections commissioner in Pennsylvania is very forward-looking corrections person. He's I think very progressive in terms of policy. So I'm fairly comfortable with Pennsylvania, but at the same time, another thing happened, and that was the election of Donald Trump. And you're saying, well, how would that be connected to a private or out-of-state prisons? Mm-hmm. Well, the immigration policies of the Trump administration are different from the Obama. And when people were stopped for, not for a crime, but for violating immigration law, we usually released them under Obama. Under Trump, they're being held. Where are they being held? Well, the federal government doesn't have enough beds, so they're buying beds. And so at this point, we were competing with the federal system who were trying to buy beds in other states and from private prisons. So it raised the price, and it caused us to end up having to write a deal where we would send at least 250 people out of state. That was the floor. So whether we had 200 out of state or 300, or excuse me, 250, we'd pay for the 250. So we did have an agreement with the corrections commissioner that she would not send people out of state just to meet the 250, but obviously that cost will be fixed now. So that's one downside of Pennsylvania, but it's really been caused by the federal government, and they're buying up beds.
Yeah. And do you think that there's any difference in the treatment of inmates in a state prison in Vermont and a prison in Pennsylvania that's contracted?
Oh yeah, there will be a difference. There's a different population usually. It's although we're hopeful that our offenders will be housed with by themselves and not mixed in with Pennsylvania groups. So I think in that respect it'll be similar. Back in when we were contracting with Virginia and New Jersey, our offenders were housed with offenders from those states, and many of them became worse as a result.
And in a lot of cases, I know now that we've have a deal with Pennsylvania, we're a lot closer to where that prison
Yeah,
would be.
right.
But in the past, we have sent prisoners to Kentucky, Arizona, further
Michigan,
away,
yep,
Michigan, yeah.
yep.
Do you see a problem with these prisoners who might be in
Well,
the appeals
obviously
process?
it's not ideal, but those that are sent away are usually have a longer prison term. So they usually they're not people that are on detention, they're not people who have short sentences, they're people with at least a year or more. And obviously it keeps them away from their families, keeps them away from the reintegration into the community is a problem.
Yeah, and has there been any marked difference in the reduction of recidivism with these prisoners that are sent
Well,
out of
part
state?
of the reforms that we put into place were had to do with reducing recidivism, and so we have reduced recidivism dramatically in the last few years. I mean, that's why we've been able to reduce the population by about 500 offenders.
That's never a bad thing. And how can the state work further to keep reducing the number of inmates that are going?
Well, again, we're hopeful that some of the reforms we put in place recently, we put into place the pretrial screening. And we're hopeful that that will result in particular people who are addicted, for example, to drugs and who have not been committed a high-level crime will be instead referred to treatment rather than through the criminal justice system. And that's where, when I was talking earlier about our state's attorney's frustration, that when she has somebody who might be appropriate for drug treatment, she can't get them in. And so those need to work together. But that's one thing. The second effort right now is reducing the number of people who are seriously mentally ill who are incarcerated. Deinstitutionalization is a great idea, and I fully support it, of those who are seriously mentally ill, but sometimes the end result is people who would be more appropriate in a mental health setting are referred to the corrections because they committed some crime, and we don't know what to do with them, and so the institutional last resort is the prison. So we're trying to reduce those numbers as well. We can continue to reduce, but I caution those who think, well, we can bring everybody home, the whole 250 to 70 people that are out of state, because many of them have committed very serious crimes. And there is, a need for incarceration for certain people.
Absolutely. And it can be difficult from a policy perspective to address such a complex issue. What other ways can the community work to expand those options for treatment or for?
Well, I think the prevention is should be a number one goal. And I don't think we spend enough on prevention, and I don't think we account for how effective prevention can be if it's done properly. The just say no didn't work.
Yeah. And last question I want to ask you on a more hopeful note is, you've worked in Bennington County for so many years.
Yeah.
What do you hope to see in the future for our community?
Well, hopefully, the good news is, for example, the Putnam Block in downtown Bennington.
Yes.
If that comes to fruition, that's going to be a tremendous draw for this area. The fact that the Bennington and Manchester chambers are beginning to work together, these are all hopeful signs to me that we're seeing ourselves as one county, as one region of the state. We are the other, hopeful thing is transportation, is the train. Believe it or not, when the bus starts taking us from Manchester with a stop in Bennington to Albany to pick up that train that'll take you to Montreal or take you to New York City, we have more people within a 200-mile radius of Bennington County than anywhere else in the state. So we have the opportunity to bring tourists here. So many people in New York City who do not have cars will be able to come by train to Rensselaer, take the bus over here. I would assume somebody from the Equinox, for example, would meet them at the Manchester station and either take them to the Equinox, take them up to Stratton, take them up to Bromley. I think those are some of the more hopeful signs we're seeing down here.
It's great to see us moving in a positive direction.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining
You're
me today,
welcome.
Senator Sears. And to
My
learn
pleasure.
more about the issues that we've covered today on Vermont Voices, keep an eye out for our column in the Manchester Journal. This has been Vermont Voices, viewing national issues through a local lens. Have a great night.